Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Rite of Flame, Hymn of the Torak, Nether Void, and many others can. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy in the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is sponsored by Cardboard Live and TheEpicStorm.com.
Welcome to episode 7 of the Eternal Glory podcast. I'm your host, Anurag Das, joined with co-host Bryant Cook and Wilson Hunter. Happy Sunday, friends. Happy Sunday evening. We're actually recording this a little later than usual. So fair warning, Bryant is already massively inebriated and Wilson is just sipping some milk. How are you guys doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you, Wilson?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. So we're going to start off with just like some basic laundry list to-do things. First, I want to say thank you so much for the most recent batch of donations. First goes out to our friend from across the pond, Mr. Francis Cowper. We have Tristan Mayshark and Dick Fisher, who have all generously donated. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And on that note, talk to me about your guys' lives. What's been going on? I know we've gotten some feedback, and so, thank you so much for the feedback. As we continue the podcast, we always are looking to sort of improve the quality of what we've got going and, stuff like that. So tell me about yourself. What's going on?
Did you just say puberty?
Hello?
Well, I just want to say thank you to you guys for taking over the last episode, and thank you for Eddie for coming on and filling in for me. So I had a child about
Gasp.
10 days ago, and I'm not sure you told the audience that. I went back and listened to the last episode, and I heard you tell our audience I was doing something relatively important. So that is what I was doing, and yeah, so I'm happy to be back. Been having some sleepless nights, but it's been great. And Cardboard Live going strong. So we've been making some stuff for Wizards of the Coast and Star City and some of our partners, and excited to release some new things soon. So, James and I have been working on that. I'm only talking about it because we had a listener say they wanted to hear about Cardboard Live updates. So we're releasing actually a pretty huge feature set pretty soon for our one-player streamers. Actually, I haven't even told you guys about this because it probably doesn't affect legacy streamers. But yeah, excited about it.
I heard that your newborn's middle name was Unzi104. Can you confirm or deny for the viewers? For the listeners, I'm so sorry. For the listeners.
I'll just choose not to respond.
Anyways, Bryant, any new updates? Any fresh deets that you want to spill the beans on?
Well, I have some pretty great writers that write for the website that released some articles in the last week that have been covered up by Modern Horizon spoilers. So, there's a Through the Looking Glass by Anthony Laverde featuring Eddie Zamora, who was actually on the podcast last week. And Eddie talks about his matchup against Storm with humans. And then a couple other articles, one about Eldrazi Ramp and that matchup, that sort of thing. So I've just been editing those. And I think on the last episode, we talked about how I was preparing for a standard tournament. I played in the Standard Open here in Syracuse, and I made day 2. And I built my deck to be very efficient with Experimental Frenzy. And then day 2, it failed me. I was only running Frenzy as my 4-drops, and I lost the mirror 2 rounds in a row due to Frenzy revealing Frenzies and that sort of thing. So it was a little unfortunate, but the wheels kind of fell off.
Oh, damn. That sucks. Sorry. I don't know. I've been really caught up with work lately. I've been trying to stream some. So like this past week, I went to Houston to visit my family. For viewers of my Twitch channel, you will have noticed that I brought my portable streaming PC and had a great time on Friday streaming. So that was pretty cool. Implemented some of the tips and tricks we talked about in the last episode. So if you are interested in streaming, definitely check that one out. Otherwise, it's just been a little bit of work. Work is starting to wrap up, so that's kind of cool. That means my schedule for streaming is going to get a little bit better, which means I can stream earlier and longer. So look forward to that.
I didn't know that your family was from Houston. I'm very disappointed in you now that you are not a sports fan. The Astros just won the World Series, a couple years ago. You have the Rockets being good, and now you're living in San Diego with the Padres, and you just know nothing.
Yeah, I'm about the esports life, friend. Brother.
Anyway, let's get into our feedback from the last episode.
Yeah. So the first thing is, I do apologize. We sort of rush job the editing. It was a longer episode, and so there's a lot of stuff that had to be taken care of. So the audio levels, I know a lot of viewers gave feedback, listeners gave feedback on the audio levels, and I was a little louder. This time, we are solving this. We're doing it much earlier. Today is Sunday. We'll have it done by Wednesday, and then we have all of Thursday to audio check. So this one's for you guys. Yeah.
I bought a new minivan recently, and the first thing I listened to on the speakers was the last episode of this podcast. It had
How'd that go?
A beautiful intro by one of our buddies. Actually, we don't say who it is. I was about to say, I don't know if we say it or not, but it was a great...
No. It's a secret thing. Like, we, at some point in time, we want to, like, be able to say, like, can you name them all? And I'm sure, like, we'll find a way to reward the viewers that can.
So I've asked people if they know all 6 so far, and no one's been able to list all 6.
Same for me. Yeah, no one has been able to list all of them. So
well, this last one was certainly maybe more identifiable than some, but we'll see. So listen to the beautiful intro, the nice catchy little jingle of Mr. Blue Sky, and then BAM! Anurag's voice comes in on my new minivan speakers, rattling the entire thing. I immediately reach for the volume and turn it down and cringe and hope that I didn't blow out the speakers in the first 5 minutes of owning the car. But
you know what the kids say these days, Wilson? They say wubba lubba dub dub. So awesome.
Guess I'm behind the times.
But yeah, no, for sure. This time, for sure, I will do a better job with the audio editing. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for even being here this episode and listening to what we have to ramble about. Let's get into the comments, though, because there are a good number, and I do want to just get through these. So the first one from Reddit, posted by Max Torsion, really enjoyed this episode. Content creation has so much invisible work behind it, and the 3 of you did a great job speaking about it, how to get into it, and your experiences. Thank you, Max. Bryant, you look like you have something to say.
I just want to say, we appreciate you, Anurag. Don't let Wilson's negative feedback hurt your feelings. I think you're beautiful, and you do a lot of work editing each and every episode, and sometimes things happen. Things slip, but I appreciate your dedication to this podcast. Unlike people that skip episodes just because they happen to have a 3rd kid.
Yeah, we're looking at you, Jerry, but...
He is the 3rd.
That being said, though, Max, you're definitely right. I know Max has also done a little bit of content creation. He runs his own little blog, the Min Max blog, with Min Hajul, and he posts some pretty good content. So I think he recently released a 3,000-word primer on the revamped Bomberman deck, which has been taking over Moto kind of by storm. A lot of streamers have been showcasing what this deck can do. A number of 5.0s have been posted and, just been lauded. I don't know. The deck is super sweet. Max has put up some good content. He's a super smart guy. Yeah, no, it's definitely thank you for noticing this. And it is hard work.
So the next bit of feedback, a great podcast, so many parts I could really resonate with, and some of which made me rethink my current strategy for creating quality content. Keep up the great work, guys, from Doogs on Reddit.
Wow, that's just a generally nice comment. Very cool.
Yeah.
Do you know that Doogs streams? He streams Maverick. We talked about it, actually. Didn't we talk about his website that he had recently put up?
We did, greensunzenith.com.
Yeah. I love his personality. He's very, cheery, enjoyable, and honestly, there's so much information that we could bounce off each other as content creators. The whole Legacy community has been very good about propping each other up, supporting each other, just raids, hosts, follows, retweets, likes, loves, dog pictures. It's just been fantastic. So thank you for your feedback, for sure. Yeah, if you have any tips or tricks that you have of your own, any interesting experiences, feel free to leave them in the comments.
I have something for you.
Yeah, hit me up.
Quit saying
Oh. I've already counted like 5 that I was gonna take out and post, but whatever.
Well, Wilson keeps on typing it into our show notes every 3 lines because you keep on
That
doing
is
it.
not me.
No, that was me. I put it every 3 notes so that I would like have a reminder not to say it. So, but yeah, see, that's me trying to get better at this. There you go. Okay.
All right, so the next bit of feedback we have is, I was saddened to find out that Anurag had streamed Sekiro, and I missed it. Ruda Barracuda.
I love this name, and I also know Dave Baruda. He's in the DMV area. Super awesome guy. We carpool to a bunch of tournaments together. Dave, I promise I will be streaming other games as they come out. Apparently, there was a rumor about a Game of Thrones X From Software video game, and I know I'm speaking a different language to Wilson and Bryant right now, but I'm probably going to pick that game up and play it, and it's going to be very similar, so look forward to that for sure. And on to some more critical feedback, things that we do want to address and, just reference in our quest to get better. One Reddit commenter, Philip Mewson, said, I listened to Eternal Glory for legacy content, not for learning how to get 70 viewers in my narrow-branded stream. And hey, thanks for that. I do agree that this last podcast episode was certainly off-brand compared to all the other ones, but we did mention at one point that we wouldn't necessarily want to bottleneck ourselves into just legacy content. I think legacy is sweet, but there's also so much other amazing and awesome stuff to talk about, so we hope to be able to cover those topics as well. Thank you for your patience with us.
Well, not even just that. If you're not a content creator right now, you might be in the future, and things change. Other people gain things from the episode, and I'm sure, hey, maybe it wasn't for you, but you might have learned something. If you didn't, thanks for listening anyway, but oh well.
Actually, no, that's a really good point. I mean, what if this last podcast was the grounds that one new legacy content creator listened to and was like, hey, I can make content too. Actually, I take it back. Now I'm much more happy. So we have one more comment.
This comment is from one of our favorite listeners and fans. I think he's a self-professed top 10 fan of the podcast, Lewis CBR. So Lewis was, I guess, this is the way this is written is generally to the legacy public. You should listen to the latest Eternal Glory podcast. You'll get a lot of advice. The beginning is particularly funny as guys without marketing degrees debate about what branding means. Well, thanks for the recommendation to the community to listen to our podcast, Lewis. We really appreciate it. I would like to say that I actually do have a marketing degree. That is the only degree that I have. And Bryant has some experience in branding. I'm honestly not sure what Anurag's life experience is, but I think that he's an experienced guy in all sorts of things. So, yeah, I mean, we appreciate you listening to the show, and thank you.
Actually, I will say one thing, though. I don't really have any experience in branding, which is kind of interesting in terms of perspectives, because from my side, right, I looked at my content creation as a hobby, but living the dream would be if this was my full-time occupation and converting that from a hobby into an occupation. I don't have any marketing experience, but it's sort of interesting the way that I look at it, the perspective that I come at towards making this into a sort of reality, I guess. I don't know, but yeah. And then lastly, and I think this is my favorite, this is probably the most productive comment that I have seen so far, and I really, really appreciate this. This is very, very shortened down, but Eric Wagner sent an email submission, which we do have, by the way, so definitely send us your feedback via email if you are interested. Brian, take it away.
As someone who doesn't listen to that many podcasts, I can't help but compare this to the Brainstorm show.
Ring!
Maybe this is a fault of mine, but I can't help it. One thing that I really loved about that show was how it seemed that you guys worked on a deck creation, tinkering together. You had a goal project and would spend that time talking about it on the podcast. I know you guys all do different things when it comes to Magic in Life, but I would love to see some collaborative thing between you guys. I think you guys have great potential. Well, thank you, Eric. We greatly appreciate it.
I think one thing that I would like to do, maybe it's not necessarily on the same wavelength, Eric, as what you're suggesting, but I do like scouring deck lists. I love scouring deck lists to see what kind of random tech I can put in my Miracles list. I already have a couple ideas lists in mind that we could discuss if that'd be something interesting for you. For example, I know one of our donors, Francis Cowper, has a sweet blue-red Narset Parter of Veils / Saheeli Sublime Artificer deck that could be of interest.
What if that made you lose the bet, though?
I didn't think this far.
I just want to say, too, that just to be totally honest, the Brainstorm Show is probably my favorite Legacy podcast. I'm sort of sad they're not doing it anymore. And it's honestly hard to reach that level of quality. So we're going to do our best, but those guys are awesome.
Rest in peace, Brainstorm Show.
TBS.
Cool. So let's dive into the first topic of the night. Topic 1. And I'm reading the show notes, and it says Narset and Karn.
Is this the first time you've read the notes, by the way?
I may have glanced through them. I noticed a couple things, and I made
Anurag doesn't look at the notes.
I made some decisions here and there. Like, for example, I think there was one thing where you wrote about your deck list being better than whatever oh my god, you added it back. Okay, well. But yeah, Narset and Karn are the first topics of the night, and I think these two cards have really just changed Legacy. In just a few weeks, MTGO is swarming. Vintage is swarming. Legacy is swarmed by these two cards. So what do we want to talk about first?
Let's talk about the high level of Narset. So I guess we split this down into two discussions, Narset and Karn. And I guess let's start with Narset, if that's okay. So we talked about these cards when they came out. We didn't spend a ton of time on Narset, but we included Narset as part of our discussion of the new Planeswalkers. And I guess I briefly wanted to talk about why this card ended up being the home run of the new set. And it's interesting because in this set, we basically got a new type of card. Even though they're Planeswalkers, they play totally different than a lot of Planeswalkers we've seen. For example, there's static abilities on Planeswalkers. There's Planeswalkers that only minus. Narset has both of these things where it starts with a certain amount of loyalty, only has one activated ability and a static. So it's really hard to look at this card and say, what does this do? Teferi is similar in that it has a static and a few abilities that seem situational, and it's hard to really determine how good all those abilities play out together. The reason why I think Narset is so good, and I think that we said this a few weeks ago, but has really played out to be this way, is that the minus on the card by itself is exactly what the decks that are playing it would like to be doing. Activating Narset 2 times, essentially impulsing for a spell twice, a non-creature, non-land, is exactly what Miracles wants to be doing. You essentially get the dig through time value. So you get to see 8 cards in your deck, and you're getting 2 of them. It's not necessarily in any order there, but you're also getting 2 of the really good cards. So by itself, that is really good. And then when you add in the static ability, which totally hoses any type of blue mirror match, it just creates a card that swings these matchups tremendously. But I just want to emphasize how important it is for that card to be good by itself without the static having to necessarily carry the card. And it's different, in my opinion, than something like Teferi, where the static plays, it has such a large impact on how good that card is in any given matchup.
Well, I know one thing, at least for Vintage, is that decks that previously had cut red are now playing red again just for Pyroblast. So I play a lot of PO, Paradoxical Outcome online, and I'm playing 3 copies of Pyroblast, and I imagine it's very similar to Legacy. While I haven't played Miracles since Narset has come out, I imagine that it's probably not as viable if you're just straight blue-white. You probably need the red just for Pyroblast to combat opposing Narsets.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to play Red Blast and Miracles now. I mean, Anurag, can you speak to this some? I mean, you've been grinding Miracles in Legacy for the last couple weeks.
So I'll start by saying I think Narset is definitely... What do I want to say here? I don't even actually know. I think the first thing I'd just like to address what you were saying, right? So regarding Miracles and how it's going to evolve and adapt, I don't think I've seen Blue-White Miracles in a decent bit online. I've seen maybe Blue-White Stoneblade, but I mean that's a whole different behemoth in and of itself. So I feel like Red Blast is very good moving forward. I know in the Gods of Legacy Challenge, the Haruruya tournament, one of their biggest tournaments, the Miracles player there who's very, very good. His name is Tatsumi Kobayashi. Was playing 2 Narsets in his main deck, but he also even had 1 copy of Pyroblast in the main deck, which I personally think might be going a bit too far, but I'm certainly down to test it out. But that just goes to show how the sort of prohibitive effect that Narset might provide against Miracles, or just like, in general, necessitates having an answer for it so that you can actually operate your deck as is intended. One thing that I've noticed is that having played against Narset, the card is very, I almost want to say the word oppressive. Like playing against Narset, like a Narset that has resolved, and you have no answer for it, it's just crazy, because then you start sitting on these like brainstorms and ponders and preordains, and you're just like, I can't do anything. I think the most depressing thing is, well, actually, Wilson, you're familiar with this. We played against each other online when we were both streaming. You were working with Jarvis. You're shaking your head. Why are you shaking your head?
Continue.
Okay, cool. And in our game 1, you resolved the Narset on turn 5, and it literally just shut me down for that entire game, which was actually quite terrifying. I do want to point out I did still come out ahead in the match. So that was kind of
fun. Onrog was also testing some sort of Miracles list with 3 copies of Dovin's Veto and a Teferi in it. He also beat us.
Well, that was not the same list.
He also beat us with a Monastery Mentor in games 2 and 3. And after the match, I saw that he had a single Monastery Mentor in his entire 75 to our 4.
Mm-hmm. Skillfully just drew it off the top of my deck at my most dire moment. But no, regarding my perspective, I've been grinding a lot. I actually have a somewhat different opinion. So I think when the spoilers first came out, I'm just going to give you my life story. I thought Teferi was insane. I had hardly even looked at Narset. I put both cards in my deck. My opinion almost immediately switched, where I thought, wow, this Narset card is so incredible. And then I was like, oh, Teferi is good, but it's definitely not as good as I thought it was. Now, the more that I play it, I'm slowly starting to find that Narset is just a headache for me. It's powerful when you get to play it and, reap the double impulse ability, but I find that very rarely happens. Decks have a lot of, I guess I want to say, like either creatures or like counter magic or just ways to make it so that Narset isn't as powerful as she could be. Like the format sort of min-maxes itself out, where you can't just, play a 3-mana Planeswalker that has no way to protect itself, that, dies super easily without going through some sort of loops and, holes or whatever, so that you can make sure that, Narset does its thing.
But it's a 3-mana Planeswalker that instantly creates value for you. So in a worst case scenario of it resolving, you are still looking at the top 4 cards of your deck for relevant spell, and then having your opponent react to this permanent that is in play, right?
Yeah, I have not been satisfied with that ability in my deck. So, for example, let's say my opponent has like a Baleful Strix or a Delver of Secrets. Delver of Secrets is flipped, attacks. Sure, 3-mana Impulse. Baleful Strix attacks, then I -2 Narset again. That's card advantage. I'm happy with that. But the fact that I don't have the passive around sometimes, where I actually depend on it, like I guess like here's a good example, right? So maybe the passive is just supposed to be like icing on the cake, right? But I actually look at the passive as an answer to Jace the Mind Sculptor, opposing Jace the Mind Sculptor. So sometimes I really just want to keep the Narset on the table, but I have to go through all these hoops, like plowing creatures like Snapcaster Mage and Baleful Strix, or countering K commands that I would previously not care about, that kind of thing.
Well, isn't that just showing how good the effect is if you're willing to do all of that with your resources to keep the card in play?
Yes, but there's a cost to it, right? Like, just because I keep it in play doesn't mean that my opponent's decks are completely shut down. It's not like a Chalice of the Void, where, they literally just can't cast any more 1-drops. They can, well, I mean, Chalice, that's not the best way to explain it. But the point of the matter is most of these decks in Legacy are not as hampered by Narset as I originally thought. Like, most of the cards will get under Narset. For example, like Ponder, Brainstorm, those are all 1-mana spells. You just play them on the first few turns. Baleful Strix, for example, that's, the card you just play it super early kind of deal. I will say, though, like Narset's ability against cards like Sylvan Library, Palace Jailer, and Gristlebrand, those are 3 specific cards I can point out to you where I've been very satisfied by putting a Narset into play, protecting it. Jace is a little bit harder to fight because most of the Jace decks will be playing Red Blast at this point, and there's no really efficient answer to Red Elemental Blast / Pyroblast against Narset. But yeah.
So I have 3 points I would like to bring up, and I've put a lot of thought into them. So dating back to Grand Prix Niagara Falls, or Magic Fest Niagara Falls, we saw a very large uptick in Spell Snare. I've seen very, very, very little Spell Snare ever since War of the Spark, or War for the Spark, whatever the fuck it's called. Wilson just gave me bug eyes. I shouldn't swear. I'm very, very sorry, audience. So Spell Snare, ever since the new set, has just vanished. I think part of the reason why is Narset, because one of the most crucial spells in the format costs 3 and you can't Spell Snare it. We were in a format where everything costs 2 that you cared about. Stoneforge, Mystic, Counterbalance, Hypnotorok, all that stuff, 2 mana. That's vastly changed with Narset. So we're seeing a change in deck construction. I think that Spell's Pierce has gotten a lot better. And Wilson put a recommended list for us to look at when discussing Narset. And I think subconsciously he did something that I agree with. So I've played a couple locals recently. I've been playing more locals than online due to just like, I love supporting local Magic. It's something I'm very passionate about. But I faced Miracles decks with Narset and 1 copy of Teferi with like Monastery Mentors and stuff. One local can confirm this. He's resolved Counterbalance against me 4 times, and I've won 3 times because he's revealed a 3-mana card against Storm, where I think Counterbalance has become a lot worse now that Miracle's average converted mana cost is raised, because they're playing a lot more 3s in their deck than they were previously. So I'm actually pretty low on Counterbalance in current lists of Miracles due to Narset, Monastery Mentor, Teferi, all Council's Judgment, because I know that some lists are even going up to 2 to battle opposing Narsets. So I'm talking very quickly. I apologize.
No, Brian, that's a great point. Do you want to continue?
Yeah. So in general, I think that maybe Counterbalance isn't right anymore. But if I was playing Miracles, I'd probably be playing more copies of Spell Pierce. And then my final point is to combat something Anurag said about by the time that Narset resolves, people have run out of Ponders and Brainstorms. That's not true. So sometimes you're on the play, it's turn 2, they've played a Ponder and a Brainstorm. So the way that games play out is sometimes people hold their cantrips so that way they can get the most value out of them via fetch lands or whatever, and they end up stranded with cantrips in their hand due to Narset. Another thing is decks like Ad Nauseam Tendrils. They run 12 1-mana cantrips. Sometimes they just literally can't get rid of all of them fast enough. So I know that I am in the Ad Nauseam Tendrils group. There's been a lot of complaints about Narset because their deck is a little bit slower, and I'm not trying to shit on Ad Nauseam Tendrils here, I promise, but they're hurt by Narset a lot more than other combo variants due to their number of cantrips. And it hurts in a deck that's trying to outgrind the blue decks because Narset kind of put a nail in that coffin. So now I've seen a lot of these Storm pilots trying to become a little bit quicker with hybrid lists, or maybe adding in a copy of Chrome Mox, things like that to speed up just to get underneath Narset. It seems very similar to what decks were doing when Sargeras Canto was printed. And now I'll get off my soapbox.
That was great. So 1 point, in addition to shutting off draw effects in your hand, a huge consideration for this is basically the parity mode in a game, where both players they're dwindled down their resources, they don't have much left. We get into this top deck war. It doesn't have to be a total top deck war, but maybe there's 1 or 2 cards left in each player's hand. And at that point, Narset totally changes the math on the long game. So these blue decks have anywhere from 8 to 20 plus cards that are affected by Narset. I say 20 plus for a deck like Miracles. You have 12 in a deck like Storm, or a deck that has 8 cantrips plus Baleful Strix and all these other things. And when you add that into the top decking math, into the lands, you go from something like 30 to 35% just almost dead draws to over 50%, maybe even 60 plus percent dead draws with the Narset in play. And it helps you statistically get ahead of your opponent over a large sample size of games where you have a Narset in play and they don't. So
yeah, actually, I was going to mention that is one of the few situations where I also think Narset shines. Is like in the mid to late game where your Delver opponent may have been like not deploying their lands because they just want to brainstorm them back. suddenly Narset's like, no, you're stuck with these dead cards. And that's pretty powerful. But I don't think, like the earlier list that I was trying had like 3 copies of Narsets. I tried 4 copies of it. I tried 2. I tried 1. All colors of the rainbow. And ultimately, I'm just kind of concluding that Narset isn't supposed to be the kind of card that you play around as much as it is a card that you insert into your deck for just generic utility. You know what I mean? Like, for example, if you have a Narset on 5, I'm just going to throw this question at you, Wilson. You tick down, she's at 3, then a Baleful Strix attacks it down to 2. What do you do on your next turn? Do you keep the Narset around? Do you cash in on the value immediately? What would you do?
I'm going to take the cop-out answer that I can absolutely not tell you what I would do in that scenario. Number one, because what you're insinuating is that I played a Narset on 5 into a board with a Baleful Strix in play.
So you would never do that?
Well, no. These are a lot of...
Never is a strong word.
All
sure.
of these are rules that I would never operate by. But I'm saying that if I did that, there's a reason why I felt like playing Narset in that situation against a Baleful Strix was going to help pull me ahead in the game, or maybe I'm behind in a way where it's what I have to do, where I'm probably going to minus twice. I'm not just going to do this turtle up and protect the queen mode with my Narset some huge percentage of the time. I think that's a poor way to play the card. The other thing is, earlier, Anurag, when you described Delver being a threat to Narset, I also just don't think it's a card where you generally play in a situation where you're being threatened by Delver unless you just haven't been able to deal with Delver at all with any of the other resources in your deck. And when your deck is basically all cantrips and draw spells and removal and counters and all this stuff, my experience has been that you just don't really run into these situations where you have to power out your Narset straight into a board with threats that can kill your Narset. So I think it creates some interesting scenarios. I do, and you're a very skilled Miracles player. You play a lot more than me, so I'm not doubting your experience here. But I also think that maybe there's just some different ways of playing the card that some ways make it better and some ways make it more of a liability.
Yeah, I definitely think that Narset is such a new card into the format, right? There's no way that we have suddenly solved this card already and we have the perfect deck list. So I think definitely more time will help figure out the optimal list, the optimal play styles, the optimal utilities of the card. And I'm looking forward to that.
I have a quick comment about the situation that you asked Wilson for his opinion, but you didn't ask for mine. Thank you, Anurag. And it's that while things have context, like Wilson said, and you don't always follow a plan A or a plan B ruling, one thing I did initially think of is Grixis Control doesn't strike me as a matchup where Narset is at its best for its static ability, because they do have things like Cowgan's Command or Culligan's Command, however you'd like to say it. But on top of that, at that point, they only have 13 draw spells left in their deck. They have 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder, 3 more Baleful Strix, and then 2 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor. So, like, it's not like it's incredibly effective there. Like, it's good, but it's not the max potential of a Legacy deck that you could be shutting out with the static ability. So in a blanket statement, I would probably minus there, but like obviously it's depending on the context of the game.
Yeah, I think so. If I had to answer the question myself, I sort of did some self-introspection and I kind of figured out like Narset's passive ability is kind of just like icing on the cake. You know what I mean? Like if it's there, it's there. That's awesome. Contextually, obviously, it's worth keeping around or protecting or fighting for at some times. But in general, I just kind of want to see this as like a 2-turn dig through time, 4 cards over each turn, where I will -2 and try to extract as much value as I can and just try to use the volume of cards that I get to snowball or progress my game plan. But in general, those are the kind of considerations and like headaches that have come up for me in testing. I've seen a number of takes on the card. For example, I've seen a couple lists where people will like have one in the main deck and then they'll have another in the sideboard, or they've completely skewed their decks to play with Narset. Like for example, earlier I mentioned there was the Narset / Saheeli deck that has 4 Narsets and 0 Jace. Like I mentioned, there's just a lot of time. Eventually, I'm sure there will be a consensus, but yeah, I think that's one thing that I do like about Teferi, though, for example, is that the turn that you do put Teferi into play, I have personally found the passive ability of Teferi to be extremely relaxing. And I don't mean to say that this is like me just trying to get away with being lazy, because I mean it probably is, but it's been very nice to be like, put Teferi into play, and then I know my next spell, my opponent literally cannot do anything. The number of times where my opponent will have tried to like, end step abrupt decay my Teferi, and I'm just like, you can't do that. It's at least double digit by now, which is a lot.
Well, so that makes a lot of sense, because if you think about it too, Teferi leads itself to more comfortable proactive lines, whereas Narset is putting you into the sub game of trying to determine, up until this point in the game, what does your opponent likely have in their hand? Is there a Snapcaster scenario, K command? Are they holding some cantrips? All these different things, right? But I know you're not arguing this. You literally just admitted that it may not. It's just about the simplicity. But I would argue that even against blue decks, that the static on Narset ends up being potentially more powerful, in that it can totally lock out a game and not necessarily just give you these protected turns if it sticks around and allowing you to untap. And all that being said, I don't even think, I mean, it is worth comparing the statics. It's a huge part of it, but the value mode is so different between these two cards.
Oh yeah. I agree that the dead turns with Teferi, where I'm just like ticking up and like not doing anything, like passing the turn like that, those feel pretty bad. But like there's still other value to extract. Like I've cast a number of Ponders and Determinists. I've hard cast Entreat to ambush like creatures. Council's Judgment even at instant speed. It's definitely up and down, and it's not necessarily like 1-to-1. Like we're comparing apples to oranges, but I guess you could still do that. But yes, like the Narset generating mass value is one thing that I really like about it. Teferi doesn't necessarily do that, but I do think there is value in playing a card. You tick down, you draw a card, you've replaced it, and you've established a little bit of tempo at least. Like if you, like, for example, bounce a creature back or a vial back or a chalice back or something like that, it's not like it's just...
Yeah, I would...
drawing cards or whatever.
I would call Teferi a Swiss Army knife with maybe, let's say an apple peeler, a fingernail clipper, and a corkscrew on it. But sometimes you just need to go out there and, dig a hole or something, and you don't have the shovel, right? I think that the Teferi is like that Narset is like one of those giant steam engines that just reaches into the ground and just grabs the earth and shovels it.
This analogy is awful.
What are you talking about? Is this like a steam engine of like a time traveling steam engine? Because then I get the digging. Then it makes total sense. You just got to think outside the box, right? Come on. But yeah, so that's very interesting take. I'll wrap up. So Wilson, you think this card is hot fire?
Yes.
Okay, Bryant, you think this card is hot fire?
It's insane.
Okay, I think this card is. It's probably like medium to medium high on the oven top. That's where I would put it.
And Teferi is hot fire.
Teferi is just fuego. Teferi is just like you don't want to touch the stovetop when Teferi's in play.
How good is 5-minute Teferi in your opinion?
I have not played that card because I play 3 colors in my Miracles deck. I mean, I've played it before, but I don't.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're playing that card maybe 50% of the time I tune into your stream. And use Cardboard Live to look at your deck list. The 5-minute Teferi.
Oh, then you've only tuned in. That's what? Then you haven't been tuning in that often, Mr. Hunter. No, but I don't know. Teferi Hero of Dominaria is kind of just like a guilty pleasure that I'll be like, oh, maybe Teferi is good now. Like when I change one thing, then I go back and I'm like, well, maybe this change makes something that I tried before that wasn't good better, kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like just like sort of revisit the broken things that didn't work. Just if you stumble on something that's like insanely good, but Teferi Hero of Dominaria is not my favorite card in a deck where I'm worried about cards like Spell Pierce and Daze and Pyroblast. Teferi doesn't really solve any of the issues. That's another thing that I want to just briefly mention. I don't even know. I feel like Teferi, the new Teferi, at least brings something to Miracles that it solves. It does have some sort of like it solves a problem that Miracles might struggle with. I think Narset is kind of more of the same, but with a conditional. This is the way that I look at it. Like, it's more of the same in the sense that like the impulse is kind of like AK/predict, but then the passive is just like the like the, I don't even know. It's just like an arc star, like a shuriken that you throw and just like completely gut someone potentially, but you could also miss.
I really like that metaphor. Would you say Boomerang would be a card to add to Miracles that solves problems that it is not currently solving?
I've played Boomerang actually. I played it recently and it was kind of nice.
On that note, let's jump into the next topic. Could you introduce it for us, Enrug?
The next topic, or do you want to talk about Karn?
Let's talk about Karn.
Karn the Great Creator is a 4-mana planeswalker for 4 mana, all of it being colorless, and it has 5 loyalty. Activated abilities or artifacts your opponents control cannot be activated. +1, until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. -2, you may choose an artifact you control from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card, and put it into your hand.
That was Brian's bedtime sexy voice.
This card is incredibly fucking lame.
Why is that?
I've been playing more Vintage than Legacy recently just because I think it's fun. And Karn is incredibly boring to play against. Like, it doesn't create interesting games. It's just 4 mana, -2, go get Lattice, end the game.
Can you explain that for our listeners?
So Mycosynth Lattice is the name of the card. It's a 6-mana artifact from Darksteel. And it says that all permanents and I think even in all zones, cards become colorless and artifacts. So with Karn, what it does is it turns your opponent's lands into artifacts, and then they can't tap for mana anymore. In fact, all their permanents become artifacts, so they just don't do anything. Like you can pretty much, the only way you can win once this lock has been established is by attacking with creatures that were already in play.
Actually, random. Okay, this is just kind of funny story, but Jarvis was playing with Karn, and he was in a Karn mirror, and he also happened to have Ugin, the new Ugin, out, and he was able to. Both players had Karn out with the Mycosynth Lattice, but the Karns were shutting each other down. So Jarvis had to wait like 30 turns before he drew his Walking Ballista, played it for 1 thanks to the Ugin, and then started beating down. Random. This is how you beat Karn story. But yes, I kind of feel like this is a. I mean, when Karn first came out. Legitimately, the legacy queues at the least, it was just all post. People going like turn 2 Karn off a defense grid, or not a defense grid, sorry, Grim Monolith, just abusive stuff like that, and then untapping and playing Lattice, and the match was over, right? I tried Karn out in Miracles. Spoiler, don't, for multiple reasons. A, you'll never cast Mycosynth Lattice. B, I learned the hard way. Bryant mentioned the effect. How Mycosynth Lattice makes everything colorless, which means that you can't pitch any cards in your hand to force a will, and you can't counter any cards with Red Elemental Blast. So yeah, that was a tough lesson. Definitely let a Gideon resolve because I had these just colorless force wills in my hand. That felt kind of bad, but yeah, don't try it in Miracles. Karn, I think Karn is very powerful though.
It's fun, right? It's like this colorless, stompy post planeswalker that can allow you to have a wish board essentially for a combo kill and a variety of other fun little shenanigans. So I can see why it might be fun for people to try it. Based on Bryant's example, it's clearly not fun to play against, and it's okay. At the end of the day, my point would be that I still don't think post is very competitive compared to the highest tier decks in the format. I hate to be that guy who's saying that, and I know we have maybe 100 post players groaning at that, and they're going to smash their keyboards on Reddit here shortly. But I just don't think that it does what post needed to do to become one of the best decks in the format, personally, even though I think that it's obviously a good competitive addition to the deck.
So I had posted a Storm article on Reddit, and the only feedback that I got on the article was, your deck must suck now because the Karn the Great Creator is in the format. How are you going to deal with this? Had nothing to do with my article at all. But So Karn is still a 4-mana planeswalker, and honestly, I'm not that salty about the card. I just think for Vintage, it's not that fun. For Legacy, it's still a 4-mana planeswalker in a deck without better permanent artifact mana. So the effects that are ramping Karn into play aren't necessarily ramping Mycos and Flatus into play, because Grim Monolith stays tapped. You could have triple Soul Land, but like how common is that happening? But Karn's a 4-mana planeswalker that gets hit by Duress or Thoughtseize. It's also bounced from the Storm perspective. And a lot of Storm decks are just aiming to kill you before you can cast a 4-mana card. So I just don't think it's that good.
I think also the format online is in a weird place where, post the Grand Prix, everyone's playing Stoneblade, everybody's playing Miracles, combo is everywhere as well. There's one deck archetype that is just noticeably not there, and that is Good Guy Delver of Secrets. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but the Delver of Secret decks are just not there. And those are the kind of decks that typically would, punish these Ancient Tomb Karn decks with their Wastelands and their Dazes and things like that. So the format it's kind of like left unchecked, which means that, the Stoneblade decks and the Miracles decks that are not really good at punishing mana bases outside of Back to Basics are not really able to stop these Karn decks from just popping off and, playing these incredible cards. So
you'd think that that wouldn't be the case, because if Miracles is becoming slower by playing more 3 casting cost cards, and these ramp decks are now playing more higher end cards and cards to ramp into them, you think Delver would be primed. Why isn't it doing well?
I don't know. I actually don't have an answer to that question. I mean, I feel like, I know like Bob has been frustrated with Delver just in the sense that it's not, pre-War of the Spark, so for the Grand Prix, right? Like he didn't even play Delver at the Grand Prix, instead opting for Dark Depths. And I think his overall position was something like, Delver's just not doing like that much powerful stuff. Like it has like one good matchup in Sneak and Show, and everything else is like 50-50, and you sort of have to outplay your opponent, but it's like kind of a consistent deck, except for like, the fail rate is less than other decks. Like even Miracles has a fail rate, right? But the fact that it wasn't just doing anything like super powerful, like turn 1 Delver with no Deathrite, no like Pyromancer Therapy, like that's pretty beatable now. So, yeah, I don't know. So then I guess maybe that's the reason why Bryant is typing, he's emphasizing the fact that I have said that even Miracles has a fail rate. Every deck has a fail rate. I'll say it. I'll own it. Yeah. But no.
Miracles sucks.
Miracles sucks. High five. E5. Is that what we call it? Never mind. Okay. God, I'm so lame sometimes. But
edit that one out.
Right. No, but I think, Delver's just not doing enough powerful stuff, and that's why it's sort of fallen out of just the meta. Also, all these new cards are coming out. Delver doesn't really have any new cards, except for maybe now there's a new card that's popping up in a lot of Delver lists. It's called Dreadhorde Arcanist. I think it's a card that everybody laughed at originally, or most people, a lot of people. I don't know, some people.
I'm still laughing.
Yeah. So, but now people are trying it out, and I've heard a lot of good feedback about the cards. So,
my issue with it is it doesn't stop the fact that True Name just wins the mirror. Like, it seems like people are playing this card to play something new, but it's not actually better than, in my opinion, than Delver, Gurmag Angler, True Name Nemesis, Young Pyromancer. Like, it's just another creature that you could play, but I don't think it solves any of your matchups. Like, sure, it's fun to flash back a card for free or whatever, but I just think that it's not necessarily making your deck better.
I think maybe it's people that never got to play the card Dark Confidant, and then they get this nice little value creature, and they feel sort of tickled to get the value off of essentially a 2-mana creature attacking.
I feel like, I'll give it a little bit of credit where credit is due. It is a little bit more resilient. Like, it's not an X1, for example. And you get, like, you don't, like, Dark Confidant has the potential, like, draw, like, lands, I guess, but at least Dreadhorde Arcanist is always going to get, like, pretty decent value, like a Thoughtseize or a Brainstorm or a Ponder. Those are all cards that I would be very, very happy to play with. Even like Lightning Bolt in certain situations, that's kind of good too. I don't understand why this card has Trample. That doesn't really make sense to me. But I mean, I think it's good enough to. I want to see where it goes. You know what I mean? Like the big matchup that I'm kind of iffy about is the blue-white matchup, right? Like if Dreadhorde Arcanist can make the Grixis Delver versus Blue White matchup, like if you can give percentage points to Grixis Delver, then that's kind of good. But testing remains to be done, and honestly, I'm not going to be playing Dreadhorde Arcanist.
I think the card was designed to play with pump spells, correct?
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
So that's why they gave it the fun little trample in case you want to put Invigorated Rampage or what have you, and is that what the card is called? Invigorated Rampage? I don't actually know the names of all the different.
I believe that was from Kaladesh.
Yeah, the Delve one, right?
No, that's Become Immense.
Oh, Become Immense. Okay. Yeah, so this allows you to basically pump spell it, attack, probably get back a pump spell because the pump spell usually is making its power bigger than it costs, and fun stuff.
But okay, so this was like a huge tirade that like we were talking about Karn and now we're talking about Arcanist, but wrapping back to Karn, right? So Delver sort of fell out of the meta, which is why I think Karn, was sort of just going unchecked. Now I feel like I'm seeing a lot less Karn, which is kind of interesting. But I feel like this just goes back to what, Wilson was saying, is that the post decks, and also what Bryant was saying, right? Like, I don't feel like Karn solves the issues that these decks are facing. Like, you go to a Grand Prix, you're going to run into Delver a couple times, and I don't understand really how Karn would necessarily improve those matchups. I guess tutoring for an E-Bridge could be kind of cool, but, like, that's something that could be preemptively, I don't know, you could beat an Ensnaring Bridge or two. But I guess maybe looking at Karn through the lens of post is simply not doing the card justice. For example, there are other shells. I mentioned earlier, Max wrote a 3,000 word primer on Bomberman, like mono white Bomberman, and it has 4 copies of Karn, the Great Creator, and it is a very, very good Mycosynth Lattice deck because you get Karn, you have LED, and you just make a bunch of mana, and the game's over. I feel like maybe even like Painter could make a comeback.
Ooh.
Where you have, Wilson loves that deck, right? Or is attached to it emotionally. Would you call yourself emotionally attached to the Painter deck?
Not really.
Oh, well. Okay.
That's a weird comment considering it's framed on your wall.
Wait, is it actually framed on his wall? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, that was a joke. Okay, my bad, Brian. I'll take the 20 by PayPal, Wilson. I got you. But no, I think there are other decks you could try it in. Don't try it in Miracles. But like, for example, the first week Karn came out, like Jack Kitchen, he made top 8 with Mono Red Painter, featuring like 3 or 4 copies, and that's kind of exciting. I think it has a future. It's obviously, I think it's more powerful in Vintage. I think that goes without saying. Just like the Moxen format will obviously not enjoy Karn, the Great Creator. But in Legacy, like, I don't think it's as scary as I originally thought it was. Especially now that, like, maybe that's just because fewer people are playing it, and like the fear has now sort of like washed off. And once people start playing it again, I'll start crying. But yeah, I don't know.
Topic 2, Modern Horizon spoilers. Enemy Horizon Canopy lands. Insane that they were printing these. Why is that, Wilson? You wrote these comments. You talk about them.
Yeah, so
You just like pull out the gun and put it to Wilson's head. It's like, what did you mean by this? Nice.
Right.
I like the pass off.
I will tell the audience that my show notes are sort of spewing from gibberish in my head to a document, and when Bryant does these, it's usually a lot better organized. So I would like to apologize to my co-host for this. But
Bryant has like indented bullets. Like that's how good his notes are.
They do look really nice. So what we were talking about, listeners, is we in this new set that is coming up, we have spoiled for us a cycle of enemy colored coming into play untapped non-basic lands that are in the format of Horizon Canopy, the Future Sight Selesnya Pain duel that draws a card. So this is pretty awesome. This is the kind of thing where, Future Sight was made to foreshadow some of these cards. Horizon Canopy was in the future-sighted frames, so people said, oh, maybe someday they'll make a cycle of these. I think that Wizards saw that the Horizon Canopy was an insane card because it's a land that came into play untapped, making 2 different colors, and could later be essentially cycled from play to draw, and that became a legacy mainstay. There was even a Bant Horizons deck. When was that? Bryant, you're the legacy historian. Was that like 2012 or something like that?
2010, 2011.
Okay.
I actually faced it at Grand Prix Columbus in 2010.
Oh, nice. So, and then Horizon Canopy's always been a card in any Knight of Reliquary deck. Even Maverick today, you will see Horizon Canopies in some number. So it's an awesome card. So now we have 5 more Horizon Canopies, and they're enemy colored. And yes, that means 2 of them are blue, which is sort of crazy. We have an Izzet and a Simic Horizon Canopy land. So I think it's insane that they're printing these because now there's going to be 6. For OCD people out there, it's pretty awkward. We have 1 allied, one of these, and then 5 enemy ones. But these lands are extremely playable in Legacy. And the only reason why Horizon Canopy doesn't see more play is because it's in a color combination that is, frankly, one of the least competitive color combinations. I mean, we have Maverick, which is a long-time deck in Legacy that does play it, but it's just about the only a deck like that really wants to be playing those 2 colors as base colors in the deck. So
can I pause you for a
go
second, Wilson? Do you remember 2 episodes ago when you were picking Maverick to top 8 the Grand Prix? And now here we are, and you're attacking the Selesnya Guild?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to attack it. I actually really like Maverick. Today I was brewing up a Maverick list with a couple actually new cards that were spoiled that we'll go over later. And I think I accidentally sent it to our chat.
Oops.
But maybe we can share that at some point with our listeners. So I really like Maverick, but let's just say everybody knows that there's fewer decks that Horizon Canopy goes into than something like a blue-red Horizon Canopy land, which is insane, right? So I think these are really interesting because they're, quote, duels that have some utility and can be used in Legacy decks in a variety of ways. I think people don't know the correct number. I think that you can probably have more than 1 in a lot of decks. A couple decks that I had adhered to the show notes are something like Blue-Red Delver, which in general does not play Wastelands, but only plays 2 colors, and because of that, you're playing tons of fetches. A lot of people are maxing out on Vox, and they play a couple basics or maybe even 3 basics. That's the perfect deck to replace some of these redundant blue-red lands with this duel. Like, you could even maybe run up to 3 of this land, I think, because you're the aggressor. You care a lot more about killing your opponent than they care about killing you, and you can turn this land into gas, which could be burn or some sort of aggro creature in the late game. So I think that's, for me, that was where my mind went first, to a deck that is, totally different than the Selesnya Guild, where I want to try this land out. Another one that is very obvious, I think, to a lot of people are loam synergies. So Horizon Canopy already was a fringe playable card in lands. I think people have played it in and out from time to time. But now in aggro loam, you have a green-black dual land that has the Horizon Canopy ability. It's just a shoe-in that deck. I think that you should definitely be running multiples. The mana base is so bad in that deck that actually having the Bayou effect come into play untapped, that is going to be a very useful land in your deck. And also having that as utility, I think that's just awesome. So those are the 2 decks I'd want to try first. I think that these lands are so powerful that they actually open up a little bit some new design space in some decks that maybe are a little bit more fringe. Could definitely see these and really boost the power of those decks. So something I was thinking about is, for example, the Reed Duke True Name Nemesis Leovold deck. If you guys remember that, that's the kind of
one
deck
you won a Grand Prix with.
Exactly, yeah. So that would be the perfect deck for this type of land, because that deck wants to curve into expensive spells, but then you run out of gas because you have so many mana sources between all the mana dorks and then wanting to basically flood out. That what do you do at that point? So if you now have this blue-green Horizon Canopy land, that's just beautiful for that deck. And I think that you could even run a couple and really add some of that late game value. So those are my thoughts on these lands.
So I saw something once these were spoiled that was a little bit different from what you're saying. And it was mostly a relief that there wasn't a red-green one printed for lands. People fear lands, and that, I mean, people that aren't Bryant Cook fear lands is a matchup that's very tough to play, and Horizon Canopy, like you said, is never really slotted well into lands. But this new black-green one, I think, is a little bit different. So in the past, I've seen Dave Long play Black Splash lands for Abrupt Decay and a couple other cards. They could shift to that, and now Miracles lands could play the Black Splash a lot more effectively rather than running a Bayou and some other cards. It's almost free. And my second thought is Turbo Depths now, a deck that, tends to flood out. Can now play up to 4 of these because I've seen lists without Bayou running the black-green fast land. And now maybe Turbo Depths has become even more of a viable budget deck because it gives you another reason to not run duels. You can now run 4 of the fast land, 4 of this if you wanted. I don't know the exact numbers, but you have a reason to play a budget deck, and it's extremely viable.
Let me paint a picture for you. All right. You have Fiery Islet in play. That's the blue-red Horizon Canopy land. And your opponent is attacking you with a number of scary creatures. And on their end step, you decide what could go wrong. And you cycle. You activate the cycling ability of your Fiery Islet. And you draw and you look at the card and it's a Terminus. And you turn it and you show it to your opponent. And end story. A masterpiece in one act. A masterpiece in one act.
That's pretty cool, Anurag. I'll provide another scenario that is probably more likely for Miracles if you're thinking about adding this land for Miracles, and that is you play Fiery Islet, is that how you say it? On turn 1 because it's the only land in your hand, but you're really excited because this is a new land, it's a new card. You're excited to try it out. You look at it, you're like, hey, the late game, this is going to really draw me some stuff, but I'm playing Miracles. I don't have a million lands, but I have tons of cantrips. I'm going to keep this one lander. I'm going to ponder. Didn't find a land, shuffled, whatever. I'll draw a land next turn. Opponent wastelands it.
Okay. That's an incredible segue to the next card that we're going to talk about. But before I do that, I just want to conclude by saying I think the cycle of lands is insane. We'll definitely see Legacy play. Try it out because lands that have utilities that prevent flood and things like that, those are probably the best, most sought after lands. So yeah, this weekend, this Friday, I mentioned I streamed, from Houston, and some pretty tragic stuff happened where I cracked a Scalding Tarn, fetched up a Tundra, and Wilson is just like red in the face right now, and I am not happy about this moment, but I will share my flaws because I'm human too. I fetched a Tundra. That is a dual land. It is not a basic land. And for the listeners that don't know, Wasteland can be sacrificed to destroy Tundra. Wilson, stop laughing like that. I do not appreciate this. But the new card, and Wilson was cackling, by the way, because earlier in the day he had mentioned this card. And he's like, it's an instant 4-of. But we're talking about, obviously, if you probably know it by now, it's Prismatic Vista. And this card, I share Wilson's sentiment, is sweet. I think Wilson is a little bit happier about this card than I am, but this card is basically like an omni basic fetch, right? Like you can fetch all 5 basics and they come into play untapped. So it's like you have to pay 1 life, but it is something like an upgraded Evolving Wilds almost. I think it can also fetch basic wastes. Is that correct?
Correct. So you can get all 6 basic land types.
Truth. That's pretty powerful, and I'm honestly really happy that this kind of effect is printed. When I saw this card, basically, I was just like, there's no way this is actually, what? Hello? Miracles chat? Type. And I think this also will become a staple in the Legacy format. But Wilson, you're the one who's most excited about this card. Talk to me.
So I think as a community, our first temptation when looking at this card is to think, oh, cool, a fetch land that can get 3 or more different basic lands for my 3 or more colored deck. But in reality, while that is maybe a use for the card, I think that this card is so good, not because of that reason, but because we get to run fetches 5 through 8 of the best fetch in our heavily 2-color deck, which is a total game changer for decks like Miracles that want to operate exclusively off basic lands. So using the Miracles mana base as an example, I brewed up what I would consider to be my ideal Miracles mana base in this future world here in the next month or so without any testing. And that would be 4 strand, 4 of this 5 color fetch, 2 Tarn, 5 Island, 2 Plains, 2 Tundra, 1 Valk, and in the sideboard, 1 Mountain. Okay, so that's 20 main deck lands, with the 21st being the 1 Mountain in the sideboard. If you start to run through the scenarios about how the fetches work and everything, you're rarely going to be in this position that Anurag so often finds himself in. No fault of his own. He's only playing the cards that he has access to at this moment. Which is, you have a Tarn, you need White Source, you have to fetch your Tundra, and boom, your opponent always has the Wasteland. And it's terrible. So when I'm playing Miracles, my number one objective above all else is to establish my mana base, carving out in basic lands, and against any fair deck, I don't feel like I can lose in a lot of situations as long as I'm drawing reasonably and they're drawing reasonably. So I think this card is a total game changer for Miracles. If Narset were not printed, I would say this is the biggest printing for Miracles since the banning of Top. It's like the biggest thing to happen to Miracles since the banning of Top. I think Narset is also significant. So I'm not sure which one of these two cards are going to be more significant. Probably maybe the fetch land, just because you're going to run more and it's going to affect more of your play lines and everything. But man, this is it's just so good for consistency.
I had a really good thought, and then I forgot what it was.
Was it that Mountain doesn't belong in the sideboard like you fucking heathens like?
No, I like the Mountain on the sideboard.
I
I like 21. Oh, that's what it was. Okay, yeah. So just following up on that, like what I have been doing since the card has been spoiled. Like every time I stream, I'll look at my 7-card opening hand. I'll be like, all right, so we have 5 spells, a preordained, and a Scalding Tarn, and then I'll be like, all right, chat, what do you think would be better here, Vista or Scalding Tarn? And so far, I have yet to see an example where Vista has not been like just overwhelmingly better. There are a number of times where I have blindly fetched like a duel in a matchup where I did not expect to get wastelanded, and I just randomly get wastelanded. Like today in the challenge, I was playing against Blue Eyed Stoneblade, 3-color Stoneblade, and I just got wastelanded on turn 3 and just lost the match. That kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like, I think Prismatic Vista is definitely something I'm going to be playing. I think I just don't see a world where like it's not being played in at least Miracles. Do you think there's like room for this card in like other decks?
Yes.
Interesting. There's actually a new spoiler that came out, but I saw basically some people brewing like 2-color Food Chain, leveraging some of the new cards in Modern Horizons alongside Prismatic Vista. That'd be kind of cool. I mean, that's obviously like an out there brew, but I don't know. I guess decks like would Painter be a deck that could use this? I'm not really sure.
Absolutely
Burn?
not.
Okay.
Maybe no. Well, Burn. I don't know.
Burn does get a lot of help, by the way. I just like randomly thought about this, but like Burn is getting so much help in this set off these new like red lands that cycle and draw cards. It's pretty frightening. Anyways.
So I think there's a hidden advantage to running something like Prismatic Vista that you might not think about. So think of when you're playing Limited or Draft, or I guess they're the same thing, but Limited, Standard. If you're a poor person playing Modern, you're running Evolving Wilds. You play it turn 1. Your opponent has no clue what you're playing. So if you are playing Burn, you could show them an Arid Mesa, which is a giant red light. You could show them a Scalding Tarn, which could be anything. Bloodstained Mire is usually combo. But if you lead off on Prismatic Vista, you're the unknown, which means that turn 2, your Eidolon of the Great Revel resolves against combo. You might be able to get to do something that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So hidden information is incredibly valuable, and I think that's something that you should consider with Prismatic Vista.
This is so adorable. I love it. I love this. Brian's just like stumbling over new words. Like, I was gonna say, like in context of Wilson has a what is that? Is that a pizza cutter?
Yes.
And you're just rolling it on your head?
It's a toy pizza cutter.
It's
plastic.
I see. Do you? Okay.
He's giving himself a haircut.
Nice. No, but do you think like the hidden information is like powerful enough to make a deck, for example, like like Death and Taxes play Prismatic Vista. That's basically a monocolored deck, right? Would something like Prismatic Vista find its way into that kind of deck, for example?
Absolutely not. But I do think that that specific point could affect Miracles more than other decks, like Burn, for example, because one of the biggest tells ever is the Flooded Strand, right? Even if you are another deck, people still often hedge that it's Miracles. And something like Scalding Tarn, I'm often thinking, okay, Miracles or Sneak and Show, or something that I want some sort of stack-based interaction against. The Vista is just, no one has any idea. So I think for the first time ever, I think that Miracles will have this sort of sub-game to play with that it hasn't really had before, which is neat. So also, I do want to answer your other question, which is, will other decks play this card? I haven't really thought of anything that will just palm 4, except for maybe something that just wants a generic fetch into one basic like Burn. But in Brewing Maverick earlier today, I played one of these. I had also considered one in Ant, where Polluted Delta is extremely powerful, and it plays a little bit different than TES, where when I'm playing Ad Nauseam Tendrils, I'm just really hardcore on establishing my basic land mana base if I'm taking my time, and I think that this card could be like a Polluted Delta 5 or even 6. So that's sort of interesting. So we'll see where it's being played. I just think that the probably the one competitive deck where you're palming 4 is Miracles right now.
So we have a couple other new spoilers we should talk about. They're both artifacts. We actually have a bunch of spoilers, but we're going to talk about 2 artifacts right now. Sword of the Sinew and Steel and Sword of Truth and Justice. My take on these cards is they both suck. And now let me read them to you. They're both 3 mana equipments, and they're artifacts for those of you that don't know that equipment are artifacts. They both have the clause, equipped creature gets +2/+2. Sinew and Steel gives pro black and pro red. Truth and Justice is pro white and pro blue. They both equip for 2 mana. So, Sword of Sinew and Steel, the pro black, pro red, says whenever equipped creature deals damage to a count. I cannot talk tonight. I apologize.
It's basically when the equipped creature deals combat damage, you can like destroy a planeswalker or an artifact.
Correct.
And then the Azorius sword, which like Truth and Justice, is when it deals damage, put a +1/+1 counter on a permanent or a creature.
Probably a creature.
And then proliferate.
Correct.
Actually, I think that would make a difference if it's not. Let me just like check this out real quick.
It's a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, then proliferate.
Okay, yeah. So it's only creatures, so that's significantly worse, obviously. Because theoretically,
Planeswalkers.
You couldn't like random like lands or planeswalkers. Yeah.
Well, you can't put a +1/+1 counter on a planeswalker. That wouldn't do anything. That would be a loyalty counter.
That probably makes sense. That's probably why.
But you can proliferate planeswalkers, so you understand how that works, right? So like you could.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's actually true. Yeah.
Hey, Anurag.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Ethical.
Can you edit that to make me seem less dumb?
Yes, I do this just without people asking anyways, so don't worry.
I appreciate you.
I do most of the editing on myself, but yes. Okay. Yeah, so that's what the cards do. It's like destroy artifact, planeswalker / put a counter on a creature and proliferate. And oh my god, I was streaming, midstream, someone's like, they just released the blue-white sword, and my heart froze because equipment is just like one of the scariest things for me to have to deal with, like not being able to plow or like block with a Snapcaster or Mentor or like unsummon with a Jace. That's huge. And then I read it, the card, the sword, and I laughed so hard because it's just so underwhelming. Like, do you see what like Sword of Fire and Ice does? Draws a card, kills a creature, and this is just like put a counter on a creature. Like what? Hello? Like I don't know. That just felt like kind of like a joke to me. And even like the black red sword, just that one seems like it's a little bit better. You know, like True Name and the sword could like kill, I don't know, like a big planeswalker or shatter or something that is kind of scary. Makes Stoneforge like an out to Chalice of the Void, for example. Both of these swords do that actually, but
So I think it's universally accepted that Sword of Body and Mind is pretty much the current worst existing sword. But honestly, I'd run Sword of Body and Mind before I ever ran these two. Most people run Sword of Body and Mind for Pro Blue against opposing True Name Nemesis, and then it, of course, generates a 2/2 Wolf. I'd rather have that effect than Sword of Truth or Justice, but before I ran any of those three swords, I would run Sword of War and Peace, as it actually clocks miracles very quickly, and provides the pro white to stop swords to plowshares or even to Fury.
It's relevant that Sinew and Steel kills artifacts, and there isn't a great tutorable equipment answer for artifacts other than Manriki Gusari to kill other equipment. So I can see that being some amount of relevance that exists now. The Planeswalker ability is almost irrelevant because with the sword's boost, your creature is able to attack and kill a Planeswalker. So the way I look at that most of the time is that it is sort of an aggressive ability in that you can continue to beat face while getting rid of a Planeswalker that would have been soaking up damage and slowing you down, which to me is sort of like a waste of an ability a bit. But yeah, so to me, it's like out of these two swords and the 4 abilities on the sword, I think the most interesting part of this is destroying artifact. But hey, people love proliferate. I don't know how much you guys spend on the forums and whatnot, but I've been really deeply involved in some cube stuff, and I read some of these spoiler forums, and people absolutely love proliferate in some of these other formats that are not legacy. So I think that there will be hype with these swords. The other thing, and this is me being sort of grinchy, but whenever these swords are spoiled, and it's okay because this is a card game and we all want to get happy about stuff. I'm not trying to take away your joy from spoilers, but everybody always sees these swords and thinks of these crazy magical Christmas land scenarios and always wants to sideboard the swords. Swords are the most talked about sideboarded cards in Legacy since Stoneforge was printed, in my opinion. It's like there's always some sword with a certain color protection and people want to stick it in there. And so recently I've been seeing this Azorius sword and the proliferating and some crazy magical scenarios coming out of this counters and proliferating, and often involving double strikers like Mirran Crusader and all sorts of things. So I just want to say, like, from a competitive standpoint, I don't see these swords making a huge splash. It's cool they exist, particularly for a cube builder. They're sort of War and Peace level for a cube, which is not like a super broken card, but a cubable card. So I'm going to be happy to slot them in there.
Yeah, that's what I'm pretty sure it's just a legacy no-go. I mean, like, maybe you could say it's like a deck like Steel Stompy could play the blue-white sword. Pro blue-white is kind of relevant, and you can combine the effect with your, like, Walking Ballistas and Steel Overseers and Hangerback Walkers, and I don't know. Kind of just like reaching, stretching. But yeah, all in all, I feel like these swords are kind of a flop, and I'm honestly, like, maybe that's not that bad, right? Like, these swords should not be that broken because, again, these are going into Modern, and, if they were too good, well, that would certainly be a problem.
Well, the only broken sword is Sword of Fire and Ice. And then there's some high-tier swords, like, Feast and Famine is solid mostly because it negates the mana disadvantage of having to go all in on your sword and whatnot, and just a nice grindy engine. And there's a couple others that have some abilities. I'm a little higher on Body Mind for some different reasons than Bryant, but I'm probably thinking of other formats too. I like that Body Mind gives you literally a body to put the sword on if you get a single hit in, which is something that equipment have. Their downside is that once you deal with the creature, now you just have equipment. So that's cool that it makes a creature. So, I think there's just one sword that's totally broken in Legacy, and I say broken, but it's just really just a tier 1 card, and it's not even that terrible that it exists. And I don't think they're going to ever make another Sword of Fire and Ice, so I wouldn't cross our fingers for any of the next 3 to be like that. I would expect it to be sort of more along these lines, but I think that's okay.
Giver of Runes.
Yeah, we just talked about the swords, so the next card is Giver of Runes, which is like the pseudo Mother of Runes that gives protection from colorless, but cannot protect itself.
It's also 1/2 instead of a 1/1.
Right, that's pretty big. Also, like, the artwork is kind of cool. Is that like Nahiri or like a Stoneforge Mystic Crying or something like that? I don't know.
Is it a core instead of a human?
Oh, you're right. It is not a human. It is a core.
Okay, so that's somewhat relevant. So I think this card is significantly worse than Mother of Runes. But that does not make it a totally unplayable card in Legacy. I think that it is mostly not going to be played, but I think the fact that Recruiter of the Guard exists and the fact that Eldrazi is a high-tier deck means that this could be playable as a one-of in the Legacy format. I don't think it's going to be some sort of we want to play 8 moms kind of thing. But the sub-game of Mother of Runes is that if you untap with it, the rest of the game against a fair deck becomes very complicated for the fair opponent, right? Because your Mother Runes is just sitting there, then you have to basically get 2 removal spells to even get Mother Runes off the board. This card just doesn't do that because there's no urgency. You can just deal with it as soon as you get the removal to deal with it on turn 3 or 4, and then you're not really set back at all. So that's my thought on it. Do you guys have any other opinions?
Yeah, I mean, if I take that and I take it a little bit further, I feel like you could even look at it like the other way around, right? Like, because it still absorbs a card, and that's a card that you cannot put towards like answering another creature, right? Like, I mean, maybe it's just like for 1 mana, it's like a relevant, like you have to answer me kind of card, and that's not like that bad of a price to pay for, for that kind of effect. I mean, it's definitely not as good as Mother of Runes. I'll give you that much for sure.
I think that's the trap, though. That like what you're saying. If you Swords a Mom, you're fine with that, right? Because they haven't really won anything there. They win with the Mom if they untap with it and you can't Swords it, because that's the point at which you are in this really tight spot later in the game requiring multiple removal spells that their 1-drop has just totally negated your removal game plan. So just the fact that you have to trade a removal spell for a creature doesn't make the creature good in any way, because the timing is on you now, So yeah, I get what you're saying. It's not like you're literally playing a vanilla 1/2 that you can ignore for 1 mana. Like, you have to kill it eventually. But
how do you feel about this as maybe the 5th Mother of Runes type of effect?
Well, that's sort of what I was saying is maybe it could be, but only if you want that colorless effect from it. And it's not good enough just to be the 5th Mother of Runes. So here's the other part of this theory is I don't even think people really are wanting 5 Mother of Runes. I think a lot of deck lists from particularly skilled Death and Taxes players we've seen go down to 3 Mother of Runes. Swamping out on Mother of Runes can be bad. As we know, Terminus is a highly played card in Legacy. And so, yeah, I don't think a 5th really bad Mother of Runes is really what I'm wanting to be doing unless I want the utility of the colorless protection.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah, I don't particularly play with creatures. I just thought look at this card and I was just like, oh, this could be, cool.
Yeah, but you kill them. I mean, think about your game planning against actual Mother of Runes, right? Like, this is totally different in how you care about it when you see it.
Yeah, that's true. My Swords to Plowshares, there's the urgency is something like I will plow a Mother of Runes on turn 1. I would not plow this on turn 1. So yeah. Okay.
Force of Negation.
Yeah, this card. I'm rubbing my hands together. Here's a little bit of.
You talk about it first. I think you're higher on it, and I think Bryant also is really excited. But let's talk about it.
So Modern now has a pseudo Force of Will. But this is not about Modern. Hold up. Where's the card? Okay, so the way this card works is that if it's not your turn, you can alt cost it, basically. So, my opponent plays a Planeswalker. I can play Force of Negation, pitch a card, and then it's basically a 0 mana negate for when it's not your
blue
turn.
Card.
Yeah. Oh, it has to be a blue card. Yeah, okay. So it's like Force of Will, yeah. I looked at this card at first, and I wasn't sure. I felt like this card was not really good enough. I mean, for Modern, I'm not even sure. I don't know nothing about Modern. But for Legacy, I'm just looking at this. I'm just like, when would I ever want this kind of ability? And then I thought, rewind back to the context of Miracles, and I'm just like, wait a minute. All the cards that people typically play against me are just like Planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts. Those are the ones that are super, super, super scary. And I can also just fight on my opponent's turn with a card like Swords to Plowshares or Brainstorming Determinus or things like that. It's definitely, I feel like this card is very good in the context of Miracles as Force of Will number 5, when other options like Spell Pierce or Main Deck Flusterstorm are just not something that I'm looking for. Random aside is that when you do counter the non-creature spell, it does get exiled. So we talked about this earlier before the cast, but something like Past in Flames would get exiled by Force of Negation. I think that's kind of cool. And I also did some math with Ved when we were talking about this card, and adding one copy of this card into your list means that you have on 7 if you're mulliganing specifically for like a Force of Will effect, you're like 70% likely to hit it between the 7 card hand and the mold to 6. If you have one copy of Force of Negation, and if you have 2 copies of Force of Negation, you're up to like 75%. So that's pretty good. Albeit in those sort of matchups, Force of Negation has to be really, really good for you to do that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I think this card is going to be at least a one of in the Miracle 75.
So I have a couple of thoughts. Like you said, exiling Past in Flames. I'm a part of the Ant group, as I mentioned previously tonight, and I don't understand it. People are laughing at this card, saying how awful it is. I don't know if they're just blind or if they don't know how to read. Like, exiling Past in Flames is such a huge advantage of Force of Negation over Force of Will, and I don't think it's anything to joke about. I think if Force of Negation ends up sticking around, the Storm decks are going to have to adapt. They'll have to consider main deck Hope of Gearper, Xanad Swarm, or at least more of a heavy emphasis in the sideboards. I think main deck might be a little bit steep, but if it ends up being a 4 of, which I don't think it will, but if that does happen, decks need to reconfigure based on Force of Negation. The other thing is, Delver style strategies, Force of Negation is literally perfect for them. Tapping out turn 1 for Delver Secrets. They now have 12 free counters to protect their Delver Secrets between Daze, Force of Will, and Force of Negation. That's if they end up playing 4, which isn't likely, but it does fit well over flex spots like Spell Snare or Stifles or things like that.
Yeah, actually, that's something that's really interesting. Like, proactive non-creature threats against Delver suddenly become a lot worse. Like, I'm thinking like cards like Counterbalance or even like Jace or something like that. Like, Force of Negation, pretty good in those matchups, even like stopping a Terminus. I'm obviously like very skewed to the perspective of Miracles, but like, I think it has utility. Is it a 4 of? Absolutely not. There's no way it's that good, but I think it's worth testing out, trying out. It has potential for sure.
I'm also really disappointed that all of the Force of blanks, other than the blue one, are absolute trash.
God, I was looking forward to the white one. I was like, maybe it's just like a 0 mana plow, or like some like maybe like if we get lucky, it's a judgment. No, it was a freaking anthem. Like what?
There was a fake plow spoiled. I don't know if you happen to see it, but it was a 2 mana swords where you could pitch for its alternate cost, but it ended up being fake.
That's unfortunate. That would have been so cool though.
Wilson was going to say something.
Yeah.
I think.
So first of all, I don't even know how good the pitching swords would be, but that's okay. So I was going to talk about this card. I think that it's playable. I think it sounds like we actually all maybe agree. I thought maybe, Anurag, you were going to hype it a little bit more than you did. So I think it's a playable card. It's good in some of the scenarios you described. If you want to maximize your percentages of countering a Chalice on turn 1 or what have you, that definitely helps out with that. I think what's going to be very awkward about this is that it forces you into being even more reactive on your opponent's turn with how your lines play out in matchups where that may or may not be what you want to be doing. So matchups where, like you said, there's some sorcery speed things that you want to do, similar matchups where they're also playing a controlling game, doing things on your turn. It requires you to play this game plan on their turn, and you can't always dictate that that's what's going to happen. So what I like about Miracles is sometimes you need to turn the corner on your turn with a Planeswalker. Sometimes you are able to hold things up. And so what I'm thinking about with deck building is I think that if you are going to leverage this card, you absolutely want the AK package. Number 1, because the card advantage offsets the card disadvantage of additional Force of Wills. And number 2, because you are playing this card advantage game on their turn, I think you just add those two things together and it's almost like a slam dunk. Like AK should go in the ideal deck for this card. The other thing that I want to say about this card is the cancel mana cost is great. It costs 3 mana to hard cast. That is a big deal over Force of Will. And I think that it's actually something that's going to be really relevant to this card if people run 1 copy in their Miracles deck.
That's a really good point. The I got so tunneled into the 0 mana cost that I forgot like 3 mana negate is probably better than a 5-mana negate. Like I mean, like if you think about it, like if you start playing like multiple copies, eventually you will be oversaturated on these forcible effects. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to pitch one force to another. Also, you can just have like one force in your hand, and then you hardcast the force of negation. So number of different. I definitely think like this is going to be better than like. I personally like it more than like Spell Pierce, and I think. I don't know, stopping planeswalkers in like the blue matchups, stopping critical combo pieces in those matchups. I think it's gonna like the primary thing about this that appeals to me is the mana cost, right? In general, Legacy is a format all about abusing and maximizing on mana. This is a card that is actually just like free when it comes into terms of mana. So for that reason, I think it's like a shoo-in that it'll see some play.
How do you compare it to Dovin's Veto?
I think Dovin's Veto. I thought Dovin's Veto was unplayable, but I think there are matchups where Dovin's Veto is good. I definitely think this has more applicability than Dovin's Veto. I will not. I tried Dovin's Veto. I will not be trying it again. I think it's just like exactly. Like I mean, even that feels like an overstatement, but I feel like this is just way better. Like way better. Okay, cool. So yeah. So we do have a couple more cards that we want to talk about. Let's see. The first one is Plague Engineer. And you kind of see like a recurring pattern here, right? Where they're literally just taking like legacy cards and they're sort of just like nerfing them. Like we've gone through Mother of Runes, we've gone through Force of Will. Well, here's Engineered Plague, which is Engineered Plague, but on a 2/2 Death Touch body for also 2 and a black. And my show notes says that Wilson likes this creature.
Yeah, so I want to correct you in your assessment that it is a nerfed legacy card, because this is actually an Engineered Plague for your opponent only. And I think that is a relevant ability in decks where you may have True Name Nemesis and your opponent may also have True Name Nemesis, and you maybe want some sort of flexible sideboard option that kills humans, empty the Warren's tokens, and True Names, but you yourself have some of these cards in your deck. Engineered Plague was always awkward in this scenario. So I'm speaking from experience with Grixis Control. I liked Engineered Plague as a sideboard option. It sort of made me consider not playing True Name in my main deck when I wanted it to be one of these flexible answers for other True Names. So it's interesting. I wrote in the notes, bring back Survival, because this is obviously a fun survival package card.
So one thing about Plague Engineer is, on top of being a throwback to Engineered Plague, it's also, in my opinion, it's morphed with Plague Spitter, which is a card you might recognize from my favorite set, Invasion. They're both 2/2, same mana cost, and Plague Spitter deals 1 to each creature and each player at the beginning of every upkeep, so it's kind of similar to the Engineered Plague effect. I just feel like they have something to do with one another, so it's not completely unrelated. Maybe I'm just crazy. Anyway, so we have a card coming up that Wilson is thrilled about. It's called Hex Drinker. Wilson, tell us about it.
So this is a 2/1 for a green mana.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty good, right? I mean, we have Jungle Lion exists, which is a 2/1 for green mana that can't block. That's a playable aggro card in some formats that many people around the world play called Cube. But wait, it gets even better. So this is a 2/1 creature for 1 green mana with level up for 1 generic. Level 3, the creature becomes a 4/4 with protection from instants. And at level 8, it becomes a 6/6 with protection from everything. So we have a 2/1 creature for 1 mana that can level up into a Progenitus. I absolutely love this because it's just an insanely pushed aggressive creature. When I look at, quote, pushed creatures like this, I'm not looking for the ideal scenario. I'm not saying like, oh, how often can I make this thing a Progenitus? The floor is something that's fairly aggro, and it has this wonderful Figure of Destiny mode. And that's what I think I'm most excited about with this card, is that you can get to this sort of difficult to deal with Figure of Destiny creature fairly quickly which makes your opponent have to sort of navigate the game in a certain way where they can't tap out in a scenario where you can then respond by going into this protection mode with your very cheap aggro creature. So how is this relevant for Legacy? I think this could be playable in a one-of for Elves, because Elves have a bunch of unimpressive creatures by themselves, and 4 Green Sun Zeniths. You see Elves sometimes get a Scavenging Ooze in situations where they just need to ride one big thing, but this is a lot easier to get. It's a 1-mana creature. They have tons of mana lying around. I think it could be interesting in Elves. And the other one is Maverick. So I brewed a Maverick deck with this in it. I think it might be more impressive in Elves than Maverick, but I still like it in as sort of a toolboxy card. And, to be honest, I'll say this for a third time, but it's an insane cube card, and it's going straight into my cube.
Yeah, one thing that I do like about this card is that it is something of like a, what is it, mana sink is what I'm trying to use. So like in sort of situations where, the game has come to a lull, you actually actively can be doing things every turn. Level up is only like as a sorcery, right?
That is correct.
Okay, yeah, well still, so that means that if you don't actually have, just nonstop action going on every turn, like you take one turn to make this just absurd creature and then proceed win the game, maybe, I don't know. Interesting is that the level 3 to 7 is protection from instants. That's different from like hexproof, so that's kind of cool. Which kind of like adds a little bit of like flavor for cube and like modern. I don't know if I'm going to necessarily see a lot of this card in like Legacy. I think the bar is pretty high, but I do think that it is another card that could be tried out for certain in some of the decks you mentioned.
Like Honorog, I think that this is a card without a home. So Wilson has been playing Legacy as long as I have, and he might remember the old 10-land Stompy decks. This would have been a perfect card for that era. But nowadays, I don't think there's really an aggressive green deck that isn't Infect that is playable. And even Infect is kind of questionable. So I don't think this is going to see play in Elves. Maverick, to me, is a little too controlling to be playing a card like Hex Drinker. But I think it's super sweet. I just don't think it necessarily has a place to be played.
Gentleman's bet is going into Elves.
I accept. Snap accept.
All right.
Hundo.
Okay. Mox Tantalite. This card sucks. So people are really, really excited about this and Lotus Bloom being together. They're both suspend 3. One of my questions is, if you're willing to wait until turn 4 to play a combo card, it should kill your opponent by the time it resolves, right? It just shouldn't be another Mox Opal effect. So what I'm hearing is, well, after you resolve Bolas's Citadel, you now have 8 Lotus Blooms that you can cast off your Citadel. The issue is, you don't want cards that are good post-Citadel. When you resolve Citadel, you should be winning the game. You have Dark Rituals, you have Cabal Rituals, you have Chromoxes, you have Mox Opals, Lionside Diamonds. There's so many fast mana cards that you can play that you don't need more. You need cards to ramp into your Citadel. I just don't see why people are excited about this card personally.
So can I draw up a scenario with this card? So let's say you're playing 4 of these and 4 Lotus Blooms, right? That's what it's called. And you're playing this weird Storm deck with the Citadel. You have a Mox in your hand, right? You have some cantrips and everything. You have land Mox. You suspend the Mox on turn 1. You're like, okay, this is going to be cool. In 3 turns, I'm going to get this. Your opponent goes, you untap, upkeep, draw. You draw a Lotus Bloom for the turn. I think that just sounds like the absolute worst possible thing. And you're playing 8 of these cards, so you're going to have these weird, clunky mid-game draws where you're waiting for your combo turn and you're drawing these irrelevant things between the time that you go off and the time that you build up for it. And it's just, I think, incredibly awkward and slow.
As foretold. That's like the most creative I can get with this card. I'm particularly not very whelmed by this card. Like, I don't know. I could see the hype. Like, maybe it's like the honeymoon phase where you see a card and you're like, oh, 0 mana Mox. Nice. Vintage. Nice. And then, you just get grounded by the fact that it's Legacy, and Legacy is pretty cutthroat when it comes to cards. Like, I'm not even sure if the new Planeswalkers that we got, like, that everyone is super, super enthused about are, that like as good as I originally thought they were. So I don't know. I feel like the sky will come crashing down and reality will be restored to what it once was. So yeah.
So I think for the Planeswalkers, honeymoon phase is more appropriate. For Mox Tantalite, I feel like it's more like beer goggles, and that this card is just trash.
Nice.
Yeah, that's fair.
But speaking of planeswalkers, I do want to talk about one other planeswalker that was spoiled, and this one honestly is just like terrifying to me. So, name of the card: red and 6. The tick up gets a land back from your graveyard. The tick down deals one. Sorry, it's +1 to get a land back, -1 to deal 1 damage. And then the emblems, kind of irrelevant, just like instants and sorceries have retrace. The thing about this card that just shocks me is that it is a 2-mana planeswalker for a red and a green with 3 loyalty. That is actually just insane. This is a 2-mana planeswalker that does not look like utter garbage trash. Sorry, Tybalt. Like, the fact that you can just go like Mox Diamond into dual land, play this, get your land back on turn 1. I'm not crazy in thinking that's just like really, really, really good, right?
You are crazy, because I think that it is good. I think it's okay. I don't think it's really, 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 really good.
Okay.
I'm with Wilson on this one.
Ground me on. Okay, that's what I want to see, because I feel like planeswalkers are pretty powerful. This like kills like a bunch of things like what Thalia, Mom, Baleful Strix, even like Delver, Pyromancer at some sorts of situations. It's, in my eyes, I feel like the decks that can sustain this card will definitely be seeing a couple copies of this. I'm excited. That I'm also like a little bit wary. I don't know. But I'm glad to know that you guys are sort of just like telling me that it's not as good as I think it is, because I might be a little bit too jaded by this. I don't know. The fact that you can play it on turn 1, even on turn 2, whatever, that's still like very spooky to me. People have been posting Rug Delver lists with this. I probably don't think it belongs on Rug Delver, but like Aggro Loam and maybe lands, for example, seem like decent homes for this deck.
So one thing that I think you should consider is you're looking at this from the lens of someone who likes to play control decks. And traditionally, these Loam decks tend to have pretty good mid-range matchups. And this is another card to increase your mid-range matchups, but it doesn't actually help you beat any matchups that are actually difficult to begin with. So you're getting another tool that's like sort of medium that will help you against these other mid-range decks, but it's not over the top good. So it's competing with slots like Sylvan Library. And what are you more afraid of, Ren and 6 or Sylvan Library?
That's a good point. Maybe like as a replacement for like the Crucible out of the board that some of the decks play, like, you know, maybe it's comparable there, but perhaps it's not actually like it's definitely not the next era of like, you know, the other Loam-esque decks.
Well, just compare it straight up to Life from the Loam, right? Like that's the best comparison so far. And I would say that it does not accomplish what Life from the Loam accomplishes, in that Life from the Loam combos with cards like Exploration and dredges more lands into your graveyard. So Aggro Loam as a deck only generally plays 2 Life from the Loams. I think that this could probably be better in Aggro Loam given the pinging ability, maybe, if you can cast it. But I think it's just a fine card.
Yeah. Maybe I just like overvalue the -1 effect on it. It's just like introducing a new option to decks that maybe did not have this kind of option before.
I think that you value the fact that it's a planeswalker very highly, and I think that's very important. I'm not trying to pick on you at all. I think there's a reason why planeswalkers are good in the game, and that is that they essentially cheat on mana. You get something into play that gets powerful effects each turn by using a resource that is not your mana, which makes planeswalkers in general very good. But sometimes that makes us as players react a certain way to seeing, 2-mana planeswalker that does good things. But sometimes those things, when we have comps for them, you know, I think Sylvan Library is a great one that gets a repeatable effect that you're not putting mana into. Or Life from the Loam, which you do have to put mana into, but you are getting a similar effect, but it's more powerful. I think that that's relevant. So you did mention these things that you can ping, which make this card solid to have on board, and it's worth considering. But I do think it's worth considering why planeswalkers are good when we do like the sort of 2-mana planeswalker hype, and I think they did a good job of designing the card because it's good but not broken.
Yep. Cool. So we have 2 more cards left, the last 2 cards, and I mean these are pretty straightforward. So the first is Icefang Coatl, which is basically like the Snow Baleful Strix, and honestly, I'm not a huge fan of this card. I mean,
but Food Chain.
So basically the reason I don't like the card is because it requires too many resources for it to have Death Touch, and without Death Touch, it's just a 1/1, like it's a coiling oracle, and that's not really good enough. But it is true that there are maybe so like this. I referenced this earlier, but there could be like a brew with like Food Chain. I think I saw it on the source somewhere where you're playing a bunch of snowlands. You're just blue and green. You play Prismatic Vista, and you're just fetching your snowlands with these vistas and misty rainforests, and then you can actually leverage the 1/1 body for something greater than just the Death Touch aspect. It does have flash though, which is kind of cool. So if it actually was like I guess I don't know, if you could actually consistently get the 3 snowlands into play, the flash may be like, I don't know. Somebody try it out and let me know. I guess that's probably my take on it, but I probably wouldn't spend too much time trying this.
It will slide perfectly right into Nick Fit.
It's the 4th best Simic card in my 720 Snow Cube.
That's adorable.
All right.
And then the
new rule, Wilson is not allowed to talk about Cube anymore.
Ooh. I like his cube. I haven't never played his cube. Last card, Nature's Chant. And this one just disappoints me so much. You want to know why?
I knew you would hate this. I knew it.
I just don't see the purpose of this card.
You're OCD. You are going to be so OCD.
It is a strictly better disenchant, and that just makes me so upset. Like, why? Wait, is disenchant modern legal?
Yes.
You didn't say that confidently enough.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, cool.
I believe it's in 8th.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, very clearly, this is a strictly better disenchant, but it's also exactly like a disenchant. So for the green decks, you're also probably a white deck, so you're probably playing disenchant if that's like the thing that you want to be doing anyways. I know for like miracles, I will be playing one of these to split with my other disenchant, which is just kind of obnoxious, but I mean, it is objectively correct to do so, I guess. Unless for some reason, I guess it gets countered by flash freeze. So to the person who flash freezes my Nature's Chant, congratulations, you win. But yeah, I've been playing around surgical with this. I have nothing positive to say about this except that now I guess I mean it's a new card, cool.
Now whenever you use some of these deck builder tools online that have like a little color pie chart, it gets to show that you have a green color identity in your deck.
Oh my god, are you serious? Is that going to happen when I load this into Cardboard Live? I might just not play it for that exact reason.
No, Cardboard Live has an override for that. I'm just talking about some of these other tools that don't consider these type of corner cases that will automatically assign the green color identity to you.
Sick brag. I'm just kidding. Cardboard Live is awesome. Yeah, so...
Correction. Disenchant was not in 8th. It is in Time Spiral.
Time shifted, yeah.
Okay.
That's what makes it modern legal.
It is 1 a.m. now, guys, so we will be wrapping up the cast. Thank you so much for joining us, listening to us. Oh, man, we're almost at 2 hours, so that's pretty cool. I did have a lot of fun looking at spoilers and talking about these cards. I hope you had as much fun listening. Please, please, please give us all your feedback in the comments and wherever you are seeing this. Yeah, and shameless plug, www.theeternalglorypodcast.com. Check our website out as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Bryant, Wilson, have a good night. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Sweet dreams.
Goodbye.